Hello, anti-novelists. I got a question about how do I keep track of all of my trackers and the things that I use for filing and tracking and whatnot? Well, that would be right here in the Book Vault. The Book Vault is a multi-tab system of pocket folders, and it goes up to 12 pockets, so you've actually got 24 because there's one on either side. And this is where I keep everything that has to do with organizing, tracking, all of those kinds of things for my novel. So if we look behind number 2, which is labeled timelines, that is where the timelines live. So you might recall from early on, all of the handwritten timelines that I lay out in order to track all of my characters, what's happening in the story, how those things relate to each other, those all live in pocket number 2. If we go to pocket number 3, first line tracker. That is my tracker, which is an index of every first line for every scene or chapter in my book. So you can see from this one, there are 3 highlighted, which means out of all of these, which there's roughly 20 of them, I'm only using 3 of those scenes in my book at this point. May add in more later, but right now it's only 3. So if you think that you're gonna write a whole bunch of stuff and it's gonna be linear from point A to B to Z, and that you're going to use it all in that order, you are wrong, because you will pull out many things in editing that you thought you would need or use at the time, but ultimately you will not. Let's look behind tab number 4, Architecture of Story, number 1. That is just my master plot tracker. It's got all of my prompts for things that could happen during each act, a few extra notes about things I might want to add in or give attention to in the story, and this just gets populated. There's some character, some scene information. It just gets populated as I go. In the middle of that, there is a word tracker for each act. So for example, Act 1 is chapters 1 through 27. That's 32,000 words. So that gives you a sense of what that looks like. It's about 141 pages. So this is where I track act by act, how much I have, and that helps me determine and set goals for how much more I need in order to fill out a good length of story for my genre, which is lightly historically based fantasy fiction for adults. Let's look at the next one, number 5, Architecture of Story, number 2. That is where my plot cheat sheet lives. So this is just a quick reference for the 4-act structure and some of the ideal plot points that you want to hit within those acts. And I also have my conflict matrix, which I will link this. These all are worksheets that I will link for you down below so that if you want to use them, you sure can. And feel free to save them and change them up and do your own things. But in mine, I'm tracking my conflict matrix from the point of view of Tara, but I've also added a few items in for Branch. So for example, a personal, so that means it's her, we know it's pink because that's Tara, is an argument in Act 2. I've got Branch labeled as a spouse. No spoilers, we'll just leave it at that. But in Act 2, he's got the argument scene. In Act 1, we've got a break-in, a co-worker, bad news in Act 1. So that would be something between Tara and Chad. In Act 1, I've got, it's under dead body death, but it's spouse, so something obviously happens to the male point of view character that is in regards to a dead body. Over here, I've got a few notes to myself. Antagonist pressure points, introduction in Act 1, midpoint pressures, and a revelation in Act 3. So as I'm looking at what kinds of things could populate the conflicts, the main conflicts in the story, I'm always leaving myself notes of where I think those things are going to happen. And that, my friends, is how you plot out your story. So if I go over to the next page, I've got a fear or phobia, Tara in Act 1. I've got a fire, Gretchen in Act 1. That serves as a doorway. And I'm not going to continue through this because there are things that I just don't want you to know. So that shows you how I use the conflict matrix alongside the plot cheat sheet in order to start populating out the main conflicts and the main things that need to happen to and between characters in order to move the story forward. So let's look at number 5, chapter index. Excuse me, number 6, chapter index. You've seen this before as well. After I get my first lines all filled out, that first line index, which shows me the scenes that I have, then I'm going to take those and start populating those into my 4-act structure. So like for this one, I've got, this one was updated on December 17th, so it's about 2 months old at this point. So there are some things missing, but nonetheless, my story begins on Thursday and it's got 3 chapters. And then I've got a word tracker over here that I keep updated so I know roughly how many words are in each chapter and how much those chapters add up to for each act. On Friday, I've got chapters 4 through 16, and I've got my word counts updated over here. And I've made myself a note about the Zettelkasten and some dates. So this is reminding me I need to hightail it back over to my Zettelkasten note box and look up a few things in order to make sure that I've got continuity in those chapters. So on and so forth. It just goes through and it plots, or it marks out all of those plot points and chapters and how they all relate to each other. Over here is just a little proofreading note from January 5th of 24, which tells me that these chapters have been both proofread for title and quotes because each chapter begins with a quote, and that if both checks exist, then those chapters are done for as far as I am in the story. The next one, I've got the plot cheat sheet, which you know what that is. It is the little single sheet guide that allows me an overview look at my plot. So often what I do as a check for myself is I will go into my story and I will just map out the 4 acts on a page. I like to do it on a flow sheet across so that I can move through the story. And I'm just checking, okay, for my inciting incident, okay, I've got that. My first plot point, I've got that. And I'm just marking myself through the story to make sure that things are moving along in a nice way, that there's economy of words, that I'm just hitting those points and I'm getting that stuff packed in there so that it drives the story forward. So the rest of these, just for anybody that's nosy, these are empty. I'm not using them at this point in time, but as I continue to have needs for my story, I will continue adding to my index and adding things to my book vault. So that is the master document. This is where everything lives. And then, as many of you already know, I take these items and I transfer them over into my digital Excel spreadsheets, and that completes the whole process. That way I'm always talking back and forth to myself between the digital and the analog to make sure that I'm keeping track of my story and I'm moving it forward how I want to. So I hope that helps, gives you some ideas. Feel free to download any of these fancy little items that you would like. They're yours to keep, and I will see you in the next video.